Hi, this is Mindy Farmer. I'm the director of the May 4 Visitor Center, and along with Jim Tyner, I am the co-author of a new book coming out. It's called Cambodia and Kent State in the Aftermath of Nixon's Expansion of the Vietnam War. And I really wanted to talk to you about three things. First, I want to talk a little bit about the book. I'm really proud of it, and I'm excited for it to be released and for people to read it. Number two, I want to talk about research and writing about Kent State and the May 4 shootings. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about this commemoration. So let me talk a little bit first about the book. So this is a short book. It's meant to be readable. And it really came from a series of programs Jim and I did together a few years ago. And if you don't know Jim Tyner, you should. He's really an expert on Cambodia, and there aren't very many people better to have written this than him. He's got quite the expertise, and not only does he read, research, and write about what happened in Cambodia, in particular the Cambodian genocide, but also he's very active in trying to help the government there and help identify the extent of the tragedy. So he puts his work into practice, and I respect him for that. But a few years ago, we did a series of programs about Cambodia and Kent State. And what we were looking at is trying to explain that link that our country, our university, our area, that link that we share with Cambodia. Because we all agree that the timeline that leads to the tragedy of the May 4 shootings begins on April 30th, when President Nixon goes on TV a Thursday night in front of all four stations at the time, and he announces the fact that he is going to bomb certain areas of Cambodia. And at the time, Cambodia was a neutral country. Also at the time, Cambodia was already being bombed by the United States. And so we wanted to explain a little bit of the thinking behind that, and to further explore how Kent State's trajectory changed because of that announcement, but also how Cambodia's trajectory changed because of that announcement. And so the first section really looks at Kent State and what's happening with student protests, what's happening with the Nixon administration. And again, it's short, it's meant to be readable, and so it doesn't cover everything, but it covers some of the highlights. We look at how Kent State was a reflection of all the divides in society, how there were Kent State students protesting societal norms who were part of the counterculture. We talk about the 1968 Black United Students walkout that was so important, this seminal event in our history, where African American students are organized collectively to walk out of classes and to create a university in absentia when the university threatened to expel students who had been involved in a protest earlier of the Oakland police. It's a really important moment in history, and we talk about that. We talk about some of the anti-war protests that we saw at Kent State. And so Kent State wasn't a sleepy town where nothing was happening. It was a town and a university that reflected the divisions of society. So we look at that. We talk a little bit about what's the Nixon administration is thinking. And then in the second chapter, we combine a look at the Nixon administration's thinking with what's happening in Cambodia. We always say that one of the things that so upset the students, both here and around the nation, when they heard that announcement of President Nixon's intention to bomb areas of Cambodia, was the fact that Cambodia was neutral. And in the second chapter, we try and explain that delicate balance of neutrality in this great time of war. I mean, how can you be a neutral country, and why would you be a neutral country when there's a major war on your border, and when there's a Cold War that's really tearing the whole world apart? So we look at that neutrality, and we look at how the United States decision after the shootings here And as part of the withdrawal of the Vietnam War, how the quick reduction in troops and supplies and the ending of the bombing campaign in Cambodia that happened after that April 30 announcement and after the May 4 shootings, how that created a power vacuum that would lead to one of the world's worst genocides. And in the final chapter, well, these are very different things and very different events, although very much linked together. In that final chapter, we explore the attempts to memorialize both the shootings here and the deaths in Cambodia. And there are some similarities and there's some big differences. But what they show is a very similar trajectory from denial to acceptance. And we look at that, and we look at the memorials we have at Kent State, and we look at the memorials they have at Cambodia. So I hope you'll look at this book. I hope you'll read it. It's short. It's meant to be readable. So I really am excited to put that out there, and I'm excited for more people to write about this because we only scratched the surface. There's a lot more to explore, not only about Cambodia and Kent State's connection, but also the international impact of the shootings here at May 4. We think so often of it as a local story or a regional story or even a national story. But it is also an international story, and those connections are there to be made. And to that point, I want to talk about the second thing I wanted to cover in this brief talk, and that is research and writing about May 4, 1970. And the key point I want to make here is to encourage especially students to keep researching, to keep writing. I know oftentimes people get deterred by these big subjects, thinking that everything's been written, and there are some amazing books about Kent State. I don't want to name them all because I'll inevitably forget some, but there's some great books being written, that have been written, that are being written. There's some great projects that are being worked on, that have been worked on. So there are a number of really amazing things related to May 4 that are in publication or will be in publication soon. But that doesn't mean the final word is done. That doesn't mean there's nothing else left to be written. And so if you have an interest in this, I would encourage you to pursue that because there are new angles, there are new topics, there's lots to be written about the international context, there's lots to be written about memorialization, there's lots to be written about Kent State's handling of the commemorations. There's lots to be written about the May 4 task force and student protest. There's a lot to be written, and there's new materials. We have new oral histories. We have new images. We have new documents. And you may have to go to multiple places. Certainly, the libraries here at Kent State have the best collection, but there's also some at Yale. There's also some at the Nixon Library if you want to make that connection. There are other places you may need to go, but there's new stuff out there. So to anyone who's thinking about writing about Kent State, I would say do it. I would say pursue it. And I think that's one of the ways that after the 50th in particular, the 50th commemoration, we can keep this topic relevant, keep it interesting, and keep a new generation learning and writing and reading about the shootings that happened here on May 4, 1970. And finally, I want to talk about the commemoration. And this is a tough subject for me, for a lot of people. I was really excited to open the exhibits we were working on at the May 4 Visitor Center. I was really excited to talk about all the things Kent State had done to commemorate the 50th. I was really excited about some of the programs we had planned. And then, of course, this all changed. Now, some of those projects will be virtual and will be digital, and there's some great ones. There's a great NEH grant called Layers of History that will allow you to explore virtually the landscape. That's important. There's a great mapping website that will be up that kind of links some of the oral histories to specific places, particularly in town. So that if you see some of the landmarks in town that maybe are understudied or under talked about, you can find oral histories and artifacts linked to them. There's also a great website in collaboration with the Wick Poetry Center called Armed with Their Voices, where you can go and create found poetry. And we, as the Visitor Center, are launching a series of websites that honor the 4 students who were killed on May 4 that are based on some exhibitions we had done. So there are lots of things that we had planned that have moved to virtual programs that I would encourage you to look at and take part in. I would also encourage you to take part in the virtual programs. While we can't gather together safely, we can certainly remember the shootings, and we can take part in some of those traditional events in a different format. We can still light our candles at home and think about the candlelight march and vigil. We can take part in the virtual program that will be at the same time online on May 4, and I would encourage people to do that. But I would also want us to think about going forward. There's a very unique link that we now see between the class of 1970 and the students of 2020. The last time Kent State canceled a commemoration was in 1970. The last time students were sent home suddenly was in 1970. The last time classes had to suddenly go to a different modality was 1970. And so as we think about reopening the center, as we think about reopening the campus, I think we have to think about that link and making sure that unlike in 1971 and 1970 when campus reopened, that the students were teased and mistreated, now we have to act with kindness. And when we do reopen, we want to make sure that the students are welcomed back. And that's what I look forward to. I will be there with everyone who wants to commemorate the 50th, and I will be there when we reopen the Visitor Center. And hopefully later this year, maybe even into next year, we're not sure. And when we do, we want to make sure that we explore these links and that we treat our students well, and that we continue to provide both an education, a place of reflection, and we addressed some of the trauma that happened, both from what's happened recently and from those past traumas. So thank you so much. I hope to see you all soon.